Hello and welcome to our special series on FP Live, America Votes, What It Means for the World. I'm Ravi Agrawal, the editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy. Today's episode is focused on Asia. I know it's a vast, massive territory, but we're going to try and isolate some key areas where the two presidential candidates, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, agree and disagree. In many ways, if you set aside the unpredictable wars in the Middle East and Europe, the primary driver of recent US foreign policy has been competition with China. If you want to pass a climate change bill, make it about China. If you have a big industrial policy plan, make it about China. If you want to get the G7 to align on something, make it about China. And just as there's agreement on being tough on China, there's also a fair bit of agreement on partnering more closely with countries like Japan, South Korea, and India. Now, whether that's right or wrong, it has become an animating principle in Washington, with both parties largely, but not entirely, in the same camp. So the question is, where do Trump and Harris actually disagree? I have two excellent guests with me today. Ryan Haas served as the director for China, Taiwan, and Mongolia at the NSC between 2013 and 2017. He is now director of the John L. Thornton China Center at Brookings. And Lynn Kuok is also at Brookings now. She's the Lee Kuan Yew Chair in Southeast Asia Studies there. Ryan, Lynn, welcome back to FP Live.
Thank you, Ravi. It's great to be with you.
Thank you so much, Ravi, for having us.
So Ryan, I'm going to start with you first, and we have to begin with China. What do we know about how Trump and Harris differ on managing Washington's relationship with Beijing?
Well, I actually think that there is a fairly wide divergence between how a Trump administration or a Harris administration would approach China. This cuts a little bit against the grain because the commonly held view in Washington is that there's a consensus on dealing with China. But if you really look at the potential leaders, President Trump is focused on trying to find leverage to secure concrete objectives, concrete measurable goals. And in the first term, he was fixated on the trade deficit as a proxy of fairness in the US-China relationship. Fast forward to 2024, 2025, the trade deficit is still with us. And I expect that if he is reelected, that this will be an issue that he will focus intently on as well. And to get at the trade deficit, he needs to find sources of leverage. The source of leverage that he prefers most is tariffs and his unpredictability, this irascible, unanticipable nature of the way that he approaches China. The other feature that makes President Trump unique is his commitment to personal chemistry, this innate belief that he has that through charm and charisma and personal rapport, he can bend other leaders to his will, including Xi Jinping. And that is part of why Donald Trump goes out of his way during campaign events to praise President Xi, even though the overall mood in the United States towards China is pretty dark and negative. He's trying to put in this bank of goodwill for future use with President Xi, the ability to try to move him on issues that are a priority to him. Now, looking at the other side of the ledger, I don't think that Vice President Harris, as president, would adopt any of those approaches necessarily. She's much more focused on taking a conceptual view of strengthening America's long-term competitiveness for dealing with a ascendant China. And in her articulation, the most important elements of that are investing at home in America's sources of domestic strength and aligning with allies, cohering with them to present more of a united front for pushing back against Chinese transgressions. Those are not high priorities for President Trump, and that's where the split sort of emerges.
Ryan, just one thing there I have to point out, and this has come up in the debates as well. You mentioned the importance of tariffs for Trump, but the Biden administration continued many of the Trump tariffs on China. Doesn't that mean then that there is a fair bit of consistency over the last 7 or 8 years on China policy?
I think that philosophically, Harris and Trump have different views of what tariffs are capable of doing. I think that President Trump views tariffs as this magic weapon that can be deployed at will to make the world more in his likeness and preference. He has talked about tariffs as being able to solve America's childcare problems, its healthcare problems, its infrastructure problems. Vice President Harris doesn't talk of tariffs in these ways. She views them much more as a narrow targeted tool to protect specific industries that are running up against state-backed competition from China. So I actually think that the analogy breaks down when you start to look at it a little bit more closely.
Lynn, let me bring you in here, just flipping this a little bit. Do you know or have any sense of whether Xi Jinping would rather a Trump or a Harris presidency?
There's a saying that the devil alone knows the mind of man, and I think that's particularly true in the case of Xi Jinping and what he thinks. I do not know personally what he thinks, but I suspect that if I were Xi Jinping, I would be more worried about a Trump presidency, given the some of the erratic behavior and inconsistencies that one might expect from a Trump administration, or at least a Trump presidency. So if I were him, I suspect I would be more worried about Trump. Then again, I think coming back to your initial question about whether or not there, the sort of similarities versus differences between a Trump or a Harris administration, I think he would be, Xi Jinping would be quite clear-eyed about the fact that there will be similarities across both administrations. And so let me outline some of my thoughts on that. In terms of similarities, in my view, I think that the differences between potential Trump or Harris administration are overstated. Both view China as the United States' primary or main strategic competitor. Second, I think both would prioritize the Indo-Pacific region, given its interests in countering China. And because of this interest in countering China, I think both would also seek to engage allies and partners to do so. Now, former President Trump has been accused of riding roughshod over and being dismissive of alliances. And of course, we might see him revert to his more transactional instincts and demanding greater contributions from allies. But I think a more hawkish and focused Trump 2.0 would ultimately seek to deepen security and economic ties with important allies and partners so as to better counter China. So I think Xi Jinping would likely have all these similarities in mind and not have too rosy a view about a potential Harris administration and what that might mean for China.